This is going to be a fun one. I recently asked you guys, what will perform better over the next 5 years? The S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, gold, or Bitcoin? I also asked Warren AI, which is a feature on investing.com that I love to use. There's some pretty awesome results, so I'm going to show you what I found and all the data that I've compiled, and then I'm also going to give you my thoughts. I will actually tell you which one I think is going to do best in the next 5 years. But for those of you watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Why don't you comment down below which one of them that you think is going to do best in the next 5 years, or if you think something is going to totally outperform any one of those four, go ahead and write that down in the comment section. My name is Nolan Govea. My students call me Professor G, and I made this channel to make investing simplified. Something I want to touch on real quick, just so you guys know, there's a lot of scammers out there that are using my profile, especially on things like X or Instagram or TikTok. Just know, and I hope that after watching me for all these years, you know that I'm not the type of person that would ever ask you for money. I'm never going to DM you cold and just say, hey, come invest with me or put your money with me or I'll take your money and do this. That's not the way that I roll. So please just block or report these types of profiles, or at the very least, just ignore them. I do have a private account on Instagram, but I don't have any business stuff on there. It's just purely for friends and family. But I don't even have an X account, and I rarely even use the TikTok account that I do have. And also along those lines, watch out for the comment section down below. I do my best to delete and report hundreds of these scammers and bots as often as I can, but they're relentless. I do what I can, but be careful, please. Okay, so back to the topic. I asked you guys which one's gonna do best in the next 5 years. So here's the results you guys weighed in on. Almost 8,000 of you answered, and the winner was the S&P 500 at 37%. Next was Bitcoin at 31%, then the NASDAQ 100 at 21%, and then gold at 11%. But let me show you the actual charts, and let's look back at the actual data because I'm very data driven. I'd like to tell you what has actually happened and not just go purely off my opinions alone. So this is what happened in the past, and past performance doesn't guarantee future performance, but let's just take a look because the insights are very important. All right, so first is the S&P 500, and if we look back in the charts here, we can first of all see that there's a lot more blue than there's red. For the most part, if we see any of these big red drawdowns, these were happening in like the 1930s, and then, you know, some bigger ones right there in 1974. Obviously here in the 2000s with the dot-com bubble drop, and then with the financial crisis. This one here was in 2022 at a negative 18%, but for the most part, we're seeing things like positive 16%, 32%, 13, 21, 31, and most recently 26%, 25%, and right now around 14%. If we look here, we can see there's a lot more black than red. So just keep that in mind as far as past performance for the S&P 500. When we look at the NASDAQ 100, we can see kind of the same thing. There's obviously a lot more blue than there is red, but when there was red, they're pretty big drawdowns. Negative 30, negative 30, negative 30. This period here, right after the dot-com bubble, right after it had gone up over 100%, that pop was pretty bad for the NASDAQ 100. 2008, it was down 41, almost 42%. In 2022, when the S&P 500 was down about 18%, this one was down almost double at negative 33%. Recently, up 53, up 24, and right now about 17. Looking at gold, this is over the last 5 years or so. So right now, over this last 1 year, has been this huge spike for gold. But for the most part, it does look a little more like this, a bit more flat. It does go up and has gone up over the long term, but this last year has been a crazy year, up almost 57%. When we look at the gold price chart here, you can see that a lot of the time it is green, and these green do go up pretty high when it does go up. But we do see a fair amount of red in here, a lot more red than we saw with the other ones. And so on average, yes, we're going up a good amount, but we're also going down a good amount, and that brings down its total average, which I'll show later on. So this was gold. As far as Bitcoin is concerned, we've only had a much shorter time history. But one thing I want to point out is this very, very understandable cycle that we see. It starts out with a negative, so we have a negative 30%, and then we have 3 years of some type of growth. Then we have a negative year. Then we have 3 years of some type of growth. Then we have a negative. and we have 3 years of some type of growth. And so what I want to call your attention to is just the fact that next year is 2026. I'm wondering if we're going to see another red year here. And based off of just pure statistics and patterns, it wouldn't shock me to see a negative year in 2026. What also wouldn't shock me though is that after that negative year in 2026, which hasn't been that negative compared to how much positive actually happens, I would expect that in 2027, 2028, 2029, that we would have some pretty big blue years here. And when I talk about big blue years, in 2023 it was up 155%, 2024 up 121%, and so far this year up 20%. Depending on the time of the year, it's been up over 50% though. Look down here, look at these numbers. Yes, monster drawdowns, but quite big increases as well. So looking at those charts, it's easy to see that there were some high years and then there were some low years, but we really want to look at annualized over a long period of time. What's the average percentage increase or decrease that average these types of assets actually do? So let's look at the past 20 years for each one of these. The S&P 500, the total return including dividends is about 10 to 11%. For the NASDAQ 100, 13 to 15% or more. We have gold here at 10 to 11% with some asterisks that I'll go over in a second. And then Bitcoin. Bitcoin hasn't been around for that long, but it has gone up a lot. It's been extremely volatile, but rough ballpark is between 50 to 70% increase on average. So something to note here would be that asterisk by the gold percentage. You need to take into mind any anomaly years like the one that we're seeing right now with gold. This year alone, it's up over 55%, but that's completely uncharacteristic. So let's look at a much longer time frame, like a 40-year time frame, to see what on average has gold actually done and how has it fared just against the S&P 500. With taking this year out of the case for both of them, let's see what happened in the past 40 years just to give you a better average of what you can expect probably moving forward. From 1984 through 2024, the S&P 500's annualized total return, so price plus dividends, was about 11.6% before inflation, or about 8.6% after inflation. Meanwhile, over that same time span, gold's annualized return was about 4.3% nominal and 1.5% real or with inflation. Very important for you to understand that and not get caught up in the FOMO that everybody's kind of running to with this whole gold rush right now. Now, like I said, I also asked Warren AI, which is kind of like the ChatGPT for investing, and you can find it on investing.com. The results on this was pretty interesting. But first, real quick, I want to thank and introduce the sponsor of this video, Delete Me. Did you know that your personal data is sold online by data brokers? You have the right to stay private and protect your personal data. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Right now, it's becoming all too common of this trend of data breaches resulting in the loss of personal data control. 1/3 of the US population's background info is now public. Delete Me's privacy experts remove your personal information such as phone number, address, and other important information from hundreds of data brokers all year long. I really enjoy that customers can make custom removal requests. We all do a lot online, especially with investing, so it's just a smart move to have an extra layer of protection. Get 20% off Delete Me US consumer plans when you go down to the link in my description, which is joindeleteme.com/professor, and use code PROFESSOR at checkout. Okay, so which investment is going to do better over the next 5 years? S&P 500, NASDAQ 100, gold, or Bitcoin? Gold has surged an eye-popping 56.4% year to date and just keeps setting new all-time highs, outpacing both the S&P 500's 15% gain and Bitcoin's 30% rise in 2025. Right now is gold's moment in the sun. Gold's up over 50% in 2025, its best year since 1979, and it's currently outperforming. The rally's fueled by bets on US rate cuts, central banks diversifying away from the dollar, and geopolitical uncertainty. Like I said, be careful with skewed data, because obviously this year, 2025, is totally an anomaly year. Gold is a wonderful asset to dollar cost average into, but please just temper your expectations. You can't expect this thing to hit a 50% growth multiple years in a row. I would expect a dip in price probably in the next year or two, or at the very least, it's going to stagnate for a while, kind of like I showed you from like 2021 to 2024. It's kind of going to go sideways or increase at about 1.4%, like I was saying from before. Gold is traditionally in the portfolio to be an inflation hedge and to preserve wealth, not necessarily to grow or to build your wealth like crazy. The S&P 500 this year has been a bull market with AI muscle. The S&P 500 gained nearly 90% in its current bull market in the 3 years, with technology and communication services leading at 180% and 160%. The forward PE is at 23, well above the 10-year average of 18.7, raising some valuation worries. The historical bull markets last about 5 years with average gains over 170%. So if history rhymes, there's still upside, but at much higher starting point. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin, but we do have to talk about its volatility. Bitcoin hit an all-time high of 126,000 in June, but has pulled back recently. Volatility remains high, and there's definitely a risk versus reward trade-off. Bitcoin's long-term path is still tied to macro policy and adoption, but central bank gold buying is stealing its alternative asset thunder for now. So looking at the real 5-year race, if current trends persist, gold is the momentum favorite. But history says equities, especially the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100, tend to outperform over multi-year periods, assuming no major shock. The wild cards are the US rate policy, AI-driven stock market risks, and geopolitical events could reshuffle the deck fast. All right, so what are my thoughts? Which one do I think is going to be the absolute winner in the next 5 years? Now, first and foremost, there's a reason why to invest in all 4 of them. There are definitely pros for all 4. The way I see it, one should only invest based off of their overall risk profile. And keep in mind whatever else they're already invested in. To invest safest long-term, I think one should see that the S&P 500 has brought the lowest amount of volatility along with a stable increase long-term and a larger increase than that of gold. So I'd have S&P 500 as the largest chunk. Depending on your risk tolerance, I'd either go gold or NASDAQ 100 next. Gold if you'd prefer to be a bit more conservative, and NASDAQ if you prefer to hope for higher gains. For me personally, I have other investments, I have safety in other places like having a fully funded emergency fund, and I'm still very young, so I'm gonna go with the higher risk with the possibility of the higher reward, and the NASDAQ 100 is definitely my second choice here. The riskiest, or at least volatile and definitely unproven with the least amount of track record, is Bitcoin, so for any new investors, this should obviously be a very small portion of the portfolio. For me, it's about 10% of my portfolio, but I truly believe that this might outweigh some of my other positions in the future due to how much it could grow in the next 5 to 10 years. If I had to guess, I would say that Bitcoin is probably going to be the one that beats all the rest of them in the next 5 years, especially in that chart that I was showing you where we go down 1 year and up 3 years. I think that we can expect that to continue. I think that we will see a bit of a drawdown either at the beginning of next year or the end of next year, probably more so the end of next year. And then if history repeats and we see 100+% gains at that point, we're gonna easily see $250,000 to $500,000 Bitcoin in that 5 years, and that will easily outweigh anything else on the market. I think if I had to put them in order of which one's going to do the most over the next 5 years, I would think it's gonna go Bitcoin, then NASDAQ 100, that AI and tech revolution is for sure here to stay, then the S&P 500, and then gold. Gold has had an impressive run so far, but as soon as these trade war talks and de-dollarization talks kind of subside a bit, I think gold's gonna come back down to earth and go smooth and steady and just be a solid store of value, but not necessarily a wealth driver. Still a healthy asset to have in your portfolio. It's been tried and true. It's been around for thousands of years and has still held its value. So it's absolutely a good asset. It's just not something that I think people should be pouring into or changing out of other things like the S&P 500 or other things that might have a much higher or better opportunity to grow much more eventually long term. Again, I'd love to hear what you think is going to be best. Go ahead and comment that down below and then watch either of these 2 videos to keep you going strong in investing. Remember to keep investing simplified.